Hey, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you guys are from. In fact, we've got some new viewers here. Hey,
What?
yeah, fifth from
New
Turkey.
Zealand?
I'm going to mess up your name. I'm sorry. And yeah, we have Mariana from New Zealand. I mean, this is amazing. Turkey, New Zealand. And I don't,
Poland?
how do you pronounce? I'm sorry, those must be initials, but hi from Italy. Okay. Blind Husky team is with us again, the whole dang team. Amazing. And hello to your Husky. I now know the story, but I kind of like the idea that you guys are a huge team. And you can hear Dan, he's already jumped in here. And then Leon is from where? Tell us where. And then Aaron, hi, Aaron. Yeah, we love you guys too. And
Oh, we got the ABQ checking in. Right on.
eight.
We got to represent Mexico here.
Oh yeah, Caesar from Utah. Chamonix. Oh man, I want to go to Chamonix. I listen. That's just a dream to go skiing there, snowboarding, climbing.
And and Finland, we got Scandinavia checking in. I've never been there, and before COVID, I had this plan. My wife and I were going to get folding bicycles, and we were going to fly to Stockholm, and then we were going to go from Stockholm to Southern Europe, taking trains and riding our bikes. But that
Nice.
has taken quite a hit.
Yeah, that would be a little difficult right now.
Yeah,
And
and we
we
got India.
Brazil, Rio. Okay, surfing in Rio, and we've got India tuning in.
Pakistan, no
505
way. I've
Pakistan.
always wanted to go to Pakistan.
You guys are taking
I
us to
think
these places
Pakistan.
vicariously.
I mean, I love how we can bounce from Pakistan to San Diego.
I know.
I mean,
Come on.
because if you're looking for sister countries and cities, there's no closer connection
What
than
a
San
match.
Diego and Pakistan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey,
Wow, very cool.
Phoenix, you're
Yep, that was my old stomping ground. I
Dan-
got started in my photography career in Phoenix at the Arizona Republic. I was an intern in 1993, back when newspaper photography was still, the heart was still pumping.
it's hot there. I'm a little
It's hot here. We're in the 90s this week, which is just about our topping out point here at 7,000 feet. It doesn't feel natural.
yeah.
Frankfurt.
Over on the coast here, we're at like 55, 65 degrees. That's where we are. Frankfurt. All right. Portugal.
And we got Portugal. Jeez, this is
This,
pretty amazing. Where are we missing? We're missing Latin America.
we don't have Russia. Where's
Where are the Latin
Russia?
Americans?
Come on, you guys. Now's your
¿Dónde
chance.
está?
¿Dónde
¿Dónde
está?
está la gente?
Well, listen, I guess we better just officially get this party started here. I'm going to do my little intro.
Chile. There we go. We got
Chile.
Chile checking
Okay,
in.
we'll see.
That's another place. I've
Hola.
yet to go. Damn it.
Okay, this is pretty cool. We should do a show where we get every single continent, including Antarctica, tuning in. That'll be our next goal. All right, well, listen.
Actually, I knew someone working in Antarctica, but they moved to, guess where? They moved to Santa Fe.
Hey, that's another sister city.
Yeah,
Antarctica and Santa Fe. What do they have in common? Temperature.
temperature.
Okay, so from India, what are you drinking at Marc Silber? What am I drinking? Oh, what am I drinking? This is a LaCroix, an orange one. It's not my favorite flavor, but it's orange bubbly water. That's all it is. No sugar. Well, listen, I'm going to get this party started officially. Yes, I am Marc Silber, and I'm an author and photographer in Carmel, California. And I'm going to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Bay Photo Lab, our friends over there. Listen, you guys, you'll hear it today. You've heard it before. Get your stuff off the digital universe and put it into the physical universe. And the only way you can do that is making prints of one kind or another, whether they're books, whether they're coffee cups. You get them printed and framed and put on your wall, as you're going to see Dan has. But Bay Photo Lab will help you with that. You'll get a 25% discount as a new customer. And I believe they still have their 15% off on everything. So get over to Bay Photo and get something, okay? Now, our guest today is the one and only Dan Milnor. You guys know him, love him. He's here with us. We're going to talk about 11, count it, 11. I have to have two hands, three hands to do 11.
You got to use a foot.
I got to use a foot. You hold up, here, we'll do it this way, Dan. You hold up 6 fingers, I'll hold up 5, and that's 11.
We got 11.
Okay.
We got 11 because you can't really do 10 anymore. That's just not enough.
Yeah, 10 is too easy, right? Well, listen, Dan, let's hear about these 11 photographers, and I think you've got one word associated with each one. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing that I think sit around and this passes through my brain when I'm between meetings at Blurb, and this is a little window into my mind. Kind of crazy, kind of meaningless at times, but it's kind of fun to do this. I was in between meetings the other day, and I was thinking to myself, actually, what triggered this was American politicians, and let's just say
Wow.
both sides of the aisle. I was thinking of words that I would love if they represented our politicians. And so I was coming up with this list of words like, authentic and trustworthy, all these different things. And then I thought, what are some of the words that exemplify some of my favorite photographers? And then if I could associate one photographer with each word. But here's the thing, which I did, by the way, that's what we're going to talk about. The thing is that every single name I'm about to give you and word association, all of these people could be associated with all of the other 10 words, because these photographers are not your typical button pushers. These are people who are, I consider, legendary photographers who are adding to the photographic conversation and not on the technical side necessarily, or the gear side, or the social media side, or any of that. In fact, I don't think any of these photographers I'm about to talk about are on something like YouTube. They're not. They're out working. It's not that there aren't films about them on YouTube. They're not making their own films, I don't think. Right. So that's the plan today. So I'm going to start, and we are going to start with a word, and then I'm going to give you a photographer, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my association with that photographer.
Beautiful.
So the first word is compassion, and the photographer is a guy named Martin Chambi, who's dead. He passed away a long time ago, 1973, if I remember correctly.
And Jared, you're going to bring him up right there.
Yeah. Chambi was a Peruvian photographer and one of the first people to do really a lot of indigenous photography in Latin America. And he was incredible. He introduced the postcard to the region, so people were not doing postcards. He was a portrait photographer based in Cusco, but he traveled all over Peru photographing the indigenous communities. I was able to go, I was in Cusco. I've been there several times with Adam Weintraub from Photo Experience Workshops, and he pointed to the building that Chambi used to live in. And I was able to knock on the door and in my terrible Spanish explain to the people that I was interested because Chambi had lived there, and they let me into their house. And Chambi's studio is now their house. And so I was walking through their bathroom and living room, and there were people sleeping, and Chambi had devised a series of like panels that would bring outside available light and reflect it into the inside of the building so that he could do portraits inside. And he was a transcendent photographer, but obviously he's born in 1891. So he was doing a lot of this prior to like photography being an industry and career. But Chambi was a very compassionate dude that spent a lot of time in the indigenous communities. Thankfully, we have a lot of people working in the indigenous communities as well today, but just remarkable work. And oh, by the way, I also got to go see Chambi's archive. And there were 20,000 glass plates that he'd exposed that were remarkable. And that was just the 8x10 glass plates. There were 4x5s. There was everything else. So considering the time frame, it's remarkable.
I was going to ask you, the formats are unusual. That's not a 5x7 like the one of the Bell. What format is he using there? Oh, I see. Okay.
What I saw in the archive were primarily glass plates. Yeah. There were 8x10 and 4x5 glass plates.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's our first photographer, Martin Chambi. Write that down. Okay. Photographer number 2. The word is patience. And the photographer is a guy named Howard Bingham. And Howard is also sadly passed away. He died in 2016. And Howard Bingham is most known for being Muhammad Ali's photographer.
There he is.
And he was also his biographer. Now, here's the interesting story. So I first met Howard in France, southern France, on the street. And we were at a big photojournalism festival, and I don't remember why we started talking, but he said, I live in LA, blah, blah, blah. So we both come back to LA, we reconnect in LA, and he asked me, what are you working on? And I said, I'm working on a documentary project about the intersection of 5th and Broadway in downtown LA, which at the time was like this amazing microcosm of the entire city. It's since been gentrified, but at the time it was this amazing microcosm. And Howard stopped and he looked at me and he smiled and he said, that's the corner that I met Ali. And so Howard was one of the nicest people I've ever seen in my life. But to be Muhammad Ali's photographer would be one of the most relentless things, and also something that you would have to be wildly patient to be able to pull off. Now, the cool thing is that you'll see pictures of Ali in the middle of thousands of people, thousands. Like when he went to Africa and there were literally hundreds of thousands of people that came out to see him.
Yeah.
But Ali will be looking back at Howard, even in the middle of like the sea of people. And I could never figure it out. I'm like, did you have a timing? Was it okay, 5 minutes from now, look back at me? Howard had this ability to make this noise, this really specific noise that nobody else in the world would make. And when Ali would hear it, he would turn towards Howard. And it was this super cool little secret communication they had that allowed him to make a lot of these pictures. But Howard was a gem. He was one of the nicest people I've ever met in photography. Okay. Number 3, photographer number 3. The word is intelligence. Intelligence. Kind of a good word, kind of a good trait aspect to have, I would say. And the photographer is a woman named Susan Meiselas, who is a Magnum photographer based in New York. Susan her first book was called Carnival Strippers. I knew her from a book she did called about the war in Nicaragua. And when I was a freshman photojournalism student at the University of Texas at Austin, Susan came to Austin and showed a film called Pictures from a Revolution, which was a documentary about her in Nicaragua after the war. And I took one look at this film and I said, that's who I want to be. And what jumped out at me about Susan was her intelligence level, not to mention she was incredibly brave. She covered the war by herself. She won the Robert Capa Medal in 1979 for her work in Nicaragua. Pictures from a Revolution is a film that if you can get your hands on it, it's definitely worth seeing. But everything she does, this is not someone who's putting a portfolio in front of you and saying, look how great I am. This is a photographer who puts something in front of you and says, this is a story you need to pay attention to. And this is not a story about me. This is a story about the story.
Yeah.
And this is the difference. And Susan exemplifies to me a subject-driven photographer who's very dedicated, very intelligent. Her project on the Kurds was just, the book is staggering. There's just so much data and information and knowledge in that book outside of the photographs that it's hard to deny someone like this. So Susan, and my connection to her is in 96. I created a printed portfolio, which was an oversized magazine, and I sent 10 copies to 10 people I thought would never talk to me. They were the clients I wanted to work with or the photographers that I admired. And Susan not only sent mine back, but she sent back a handwritten letter that was feedback about my portfolio and like offered suggestions and said, work on this and make things that are more personal and whatever. And I ran into her probably 10 years ago in New York at a Blurb event. And I swear she remembered my portfolio. And I was shocked. So that is a very, very rare person in the photography world.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to, this is Jared, by the way, for the audience, something that we often talk about here on the show, and I know you've brought up too, these are not very technically perfect photos either.
Right.
You know, like a lot of these photos have so many technical flaws that you could point out, but that doesn't diminish how powerful these photos are. So I just thought that was something that really struck out to me, showing how you don't have to be, technically perfect in your photography to create these stunning, powerful images.
Yeah, it's rare that the technical perfection conversation comes in the photography discussion unless you're talking about someone who shoots like product.
Yeah.
For example, we're going to get to a photographer in a minute that does a lot of still life, and that stuff is technically perfect. But for something like reportage or documentary, Susan's work is about content, and it's about composition, and it's about access and knowledge. And so yeah, they're not, I don't think photographers like this are looking for technical perfection. She's obviously chosen to work with an X-Pan format here for very, very specific reasons, but that's probably as far as it goes. Okay, we ready for photographer number 4?
Yeah.
Yep,
So,
just as a reminder for, or just to get anybody clued in who has just joined us, this is Dan Milnor, who is speaking, and we're going over a bunch of photographers.
11 to be
and
specific.
Words that, 11 different photographers. So let's go ahead and go to the next photographer.
So the next word is tenacity. And this guy needs no introduction, which is W. Eugene Smith. He's considered by many to be the best, most possessed documentary photographer of all time, although that's arguable. There's plenty of other people who are equally as possessed. But considering the time frame, and Gene Smith put every single waking moment of every day into what he was doing. And when you consider the time frame, the scale in which he worked, and there's a story about he was commissioned to do a project on Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh. And I want to say he was asked for somewhere between 10 and 20 prints from the project when he submitted it to Life magazine. And he delivered 10,000 prints.
10,000.
And he said, I'm not done. I'm not remotely done. I need to keep working. Apparently, and I've heard Gene Smith, his son, speak before. There's a couple of documentaries about him that are fantastic. There's actually a book and a movie called The Jazz Loft Project, which is about him squatting in a building in New York that was filled with some of the best jazz musicians in the world. Hang on a second, my sister's calling me. And Gene Smith was, to me, when I discovered Gene Smith as a young photographer, I was sort of so intimidated by what he had done. It was difficult to look at him because I just thought, I'm never going to get there. Like, it's impossible for me to get there. But Gene Smith was a remarkable photographer. His personal life was a bit more tumultuous, but in terms of imagery, there's nothing. I don't think there's been anybody else walk the planet besides maybe one or two other people that you can even put in the same conversation. So Gene Smith is our tenacious photographer.
Absolutely.
Number 5 is one of my favorite people. I don't know him particularly well, but he's one of my favorite people. I have been able to spend a little time around him and with him. The word is curiosity. And this is a word that I think is a critical word for all of us, regardless of whether or not we make pictures, but just being curious about life itself instead of being led into a direction of you're supposed to believe X, Y, and Z. You're curious. You go out, you look around what's around the next corner. And this photographer is a guy named Dan Winters. And I have 3 books here that I can show you. So Jared, pop to me for a sec, and I'm going to show you these books because Dan Winters has a ton of books. But here's one.
Let's pull this screen up here with you. There we go.
This is called The Gray Ghost, right? Which is still sealed. I haven't opened it yet. I'm hoping to get him to sign it at some point. I have one called The Last Launch, which is about the last space shuttle launch. And then I have one called Dan Winters America with Will Ferrell on the cover, which is amazing. The point is, these could be shot by 3 different people. And if you take one look at Dan Winters' website, your jaw will hit the floor over the range of work, the quality of work. He's shooting models for Star Wars. He's doing portraiture, editorial, commercial, advertising, personal project. He's a beekeeper. I've been around Dan a couple of times, and within 5 minutes of meeting him the first time, the first thought I had was calling him a photographer is unfair because he's one of the best photographers I've ever met, but he's also so much more. His knowledge level is so astounding. Range. I was telling these guys earlier that I was hanging out with him once, and it was at night, and there was conversations happening, and it was like the worst person in the world to play Trivial Pursuit with because he knows about everything. And oh, by the way, he's an artist and illustrator as well. He does illustrations that are so scary good. Anyway, he's a curious human being. Dan Winters is, I'm guessing, I've never had this conversation with him, but I'm guessing that he is on a perpetual hunt for knowledge. And I can't imagine any other more powerful aspect for being a photographer than a hunt for knowledge.
Absolutely.
For you geeks out there, and I know there's a lot of you, so don't lie, Dan is incredibly technical. He knows about everything, whether it's analog, printing, film, digital, software, doesn't matter. I've not run into anything in any conversation with him ever where he's like, I don't know about that. He knows way more than me about all this stuff. So anyway, he's a pretty good guy to study.
Dan, as a side note, you're giving me a list of 11 people we're going to, some of them we can't interview, like Gene Smith, but this is making a great list of people I need to reach out to get on the show.
Look, these people that I'm giving you are exemplary of what I would consider the actual photography industry.
Yeah.
Again, Dan Winters, as far as I know, and I've never looked, but I don't think Dan Winters has a YouTube channel, right? Because he's working all the time. And there are films, I'm sure, about him. But these are people who are the backbones of the professional photography industry. And there are not very many of these people. They're not as many as there used to be. But if you look at this work, it is undeniable in terms of his range and talents. And that to me these are few and far between. There's a lot of people in the photography space right now who are blowing a lot of hot air, who do not have a single photograph that matches anything on Dan Winter's site. And so you have to be careful where you get your information from.
Yeah.
And so these are the people that you look at and say, if you're trying to be a photographer, if you really want to know what's going on in the world of photography, these are the kind of people that you need to follow and you need to pay attention to.
Beautiful.
Okay. Number 6, we are just flying through these
Absolutely.
things. Number 6 word is positivity. And the reason I bring this up ties into something that we spoke about last time I was on this call. Is I would guess that about 15 to 20% of all photographers today, and I hate saying this is a little tough love, so you better buckle up.
Listen up, folks. Uncle Dan is about to hit you with some tough love between the eyes.
Chin strap on. 15 to 20% of photographers are haters. They're going to hate every single thing you do,
Ouch.
Regardless of what it is. You could give away, you could solve poverty and they would find a way to hate you. That's the world we live in. And I would probably tip that scale much higher if you talk about the online world. The physical photography world, the world that these people exist in, is not that negative. There's often really good camaraderie behind the scenes. There's competition for sure, but there's camaraderie. And positivity is a word that is essential to me, especially if you're going to make a career out of photography, because if you're not positive, people don't want to hang out with you. And the photographer is Douglas Kirkland. And I have been around photography now for a long, long time. I've never met anyone like Kirkland. Kirkland, I want to say, is in his mid to late 80s. He shot many of the famous pictures of Marilyn Monroe. Douglas Kirkland had an assignment, something like this. I don't know the specifics, but they are along the lines of, he had a once a month assignment from Kodak for something like 40 years. So think about that. First of all, he is one of the most prolific people I have ever seen. I cannot imagine what his archive looks like. He's got all the celebrity stuff. He's got the documentary stuff. He's got the film stuff. He's got the personal stuff. He's in his mid to late 80s. He still shoots 8x10. He shoots every single conceivable format you could possibly imagine. And if you've ever had more than 10 seconds of being around him, he is one of the most positive human beings you have ever encountered. He's Canadian. That explains all of it right there. He's Canadian. They're better than us. They're nicer. And oh, by the way, that's a portrait of Dwayne Michaels there and Gordon Parks.
Gordon Parks, go back to that one, Jared. Gordon Parks, who is not only a musician, but an amazing photographer who we could go take a trip with as well, right? I mean, look at this.
Every single one of these words and photographers I'm giving you, there's a dozen other people that would fit these categories on the same scale. Dwayne Michaels was my original pick for what did I have to? Oh, for positivity, for the same word. Dwayne Michaels is a remarkable guy. He's also in his 80s, and these people are few and far between. So Kirkland is my positivity statement.
I love it.
And he's a remarkable dude, and he's still out shooting. And I feel like of all the people I've met in photography, he's one of the ones that I feel like most honored to have met.
Fantastic.
Okay, number 7. Are we ready to move on?
Number 7.
Let me get this giant book ready to queue up here.
Let me bring that
I've got a teeny book and I've got a small book. And this person also needs no introduction. Point number 7 is scale. The word is scale. Can you put something on the map that can hit a scale that is sort of unparalleled by anyone else? And it doesn't mean that every project you do has to go out across the world. Sebastião Salgado is the photographer.
Oh yeah.
Now Salgado And I have 2 books to show, Jared. So I have a little tiny book that I found in a bookstore in Rome, which is about, it's in Italian, and I don't know what the subtitle is because I can't read Italian, amongst many of the other languages I don't know.
Hold it up there. We have someone from Italy on the call. Maybe we can get a translation.
It's called In Cammino Guida alla Mostra.
Well,
So,
something in the road.
Yeah, a guide or something. Mostra is, I want to say fly or mouth. I don't know. I'm totally wrong. I can't speak Italian. I'm just making stuff
We're
up.
just guessing.
The other book is more representative of scale. And this is called Workers, which was a 10-year project. Now, here's my introduction. I've never met Salgado. I've been to a couple of his lectures, San Diego at the Museum of Photographic Art. I think it was MOPA in San Diego. Anyway, I've seen him speak in LA. I've seen him speak in San Diego. I worked at Kodak and heard stories about Salgado. And Salgado would come to Kodak for funding. Again, I don't know the details. It was back in the day. And he would come and ask for significant things. And Kodak would give them because Salgado would come with a 10-year plan. He would come with a 10-year plan for the project, exhibitions, books, countries, resources, how the work would end up being seen, who was going to publish it, where it was going to be seen. He would come with multi-year magazine assignments already secured for the project. No one was working on this scale. We're looking, what you're showing right there, the gold mine in Peru, that's some of his most recognizable, famous work. That is quite an essay. Other photographers have visited this location since then, but no one's come close to capturing what Salgado did. When I think about scale, and I think he is the modern era Gene Smith, that to me is the way of describing him. I don't know of another photographer who is able to work on scale like this. There was an amazing film about him a couple of years ago called Salt of the Earth, a documentary film. It's intimidating. When I buy a Salgado book, I don't look at it for quite some time because I know what it's going to do to me when I open it up, because it's going to be so far beyond anything that I would be able to accomplish that it's a bit intimidating. And then I get over myself and I open it up and try to learn what I can. He has an amazing printer. I believe it's a French woman who does his darkroom printing for him. They are remarkable. His work is just sort of unparalleled at this point.
Fantastic.
Okay, number 8. This is a bit different, and I've mentioned this person before. The word is more, M-O-R-E. And I think this is something that I am fond of trying to tell people who want to be photographers is you have to be more. You just can't be a person who presses the button anymore. The global attention span for yet another image is just not enough. It's almost impossible to cut through the noise, even if your images are good. You have to be more. And clients want to hang out with somebody who's more than a button pusher. They want to hang out with somebody who knows about the world. And there's a photographer in LA named Sarah Terry, and it's Sarah without an H. It's S-A-R-A, Terry. And she is now, I want to say, she's affiliated with 7 agency in some way, but I don't know the details. But I met Sarah a long time ago. And I met her when she was first, I would say, quote, getting into photography. She's a very accomplished writer. So right off the bat, she can combine very, very good writing with photography. That puts her in a separate category. But Sarah, from the beginning, was working on projects that were not about her. She was working on projects that were about other people. She did a book on Bosnia called Farewell Bosnia. I think it's called Farewell Bosnia, and spent a lot of time with the widows in Srebrenica where the massacre took place. That was her first book, I think, was on the Balkans. And now she has a thing called the Aftermath Project, which is a year-long thing that highlights what happens in a conflict zone after the war has ended. The point is, it's a photographer who's doing things that are not solely about her. And that, to me, is what it's all about. You don't need to know about me. I'm not that interesting a person, but maybe there is something about my work in the story that's going to inform you about something else. It's the reason why we're doing AG23, the zine collab. We're trying to promote understanding through dialogue and art. It's not about us. It's about what's on those pages. And Sarah, she's not an AG23, but Sarah is one of those style of photographers who's doing that kind of thing. Somebody to always watch. And she's a filmmaker as well. So she writes, directs films, and shoots stills.
Fantastic. You can see the cinematographic quality, or like that image right there.
Yeah, and also look at the amount of work.
Yeah.
I mean, if I did a website, I wouldn't have that amount of work. That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
And let's face it, there's another little thing you might be overlooking here, is that these people are all photographers who photograph people. I see a lot of these street quote unquote street photographer types running around blowing a lot of hot air, and technically they're photographing people, but there's no interaction whatsoever. So for example, Jared, freeze on that frame right there.
Yeah.
So Sarah's not Muslim, right? So she's working in the Balkans. They're detailing, what happened at Srebrenica, and you have to get access. You have to get in here and get these people. One, they have to trust you. They have to provide access, and then you have to work. And it takes forever. It's really hard to do this kind of work, and it gets overlooked. And people, like the people who don't know anything about photography, will look at an image like this and try to find what's technically not right with it. It doesn't matter. It's about the story of Srebrenica, and if you don't know that, then you got to get your history books out. So it's great. These people are like endless. If you tap into Sarah's website and you start peeking around, it'll blow your hair back for sure.
This is great, Dan.
Okay.
It really is.
Yeah,
It's an education.
Before we go to the next photographer, just wanted to we've had several new people coming in. So I just wanted to let people know we've got Dan Milnor here talking, and we're discussing words that describe what great photographers have, and we're going through 11 different photographers, and if you want to know their names, I'm putting them in the chat. And for anybody that's watching or listening this, not live, there will be links to all of their websites in the show notes.
Okay.
I'm glad you're doing that, because I'm too lazy to do that.
Jared is the man behind the scenes.
Everyone give Jared a round of applause.
Yeah.
Just a silent one, even just a little. There we go. He's going to link. Anyone who takes the time to link deserves a little applause. Okay, we're moving on. We've got 3 left. And the number 9 is really interesting, because I had a really hard time choosing. There's a lot of people who fit this bill. And the word is originality. And there's a lot of philosophy around the fact that originality is a fallacy, that it's a unicorn, it's an impossible thing to find. But I find it intriguing. And the photographer is someone named Joel Peter Witkin. And I simply do not know anyone else that makes work remotely like Witkin. And that's all I'll say. I don't know him. Apparently he lives in New Mexico. I don't know for sure. I've never met him. I don't really know. That all I know is if I see a Witkin picture from 100 yards away, I go, that is a Joel Peter Witkin. So that, to me, there's a profound aspect of that. So for example, if you put my work, my documentary work, if you put my best documentary work in front of a crowd of photographers, they might confuse me for someone else. That's a possibility. It's happened before, is why I'm saying that. If you put a Witkin piece in front of that same panel of photographers, there is no doubt, there's no confusion over who made the photograph. They will say 100% across the board, that is a Joel Peter Witkin image. That's commendable. That's kind of what we're after. And I think this also speaks to something like social media. Social media is about what has already been seen. It's about copying what's already had success in being seen. It's not about making original work. And so you see Witkin and you go, holy cow. And you may like it or not like the work. It is pretty shocking style of photograph, but it's unique. And that's the point. And there's a bunch of other names that I was floating around. I'm not going to share them now, but there were other names that I went back and forth with about who I could use for originality. There are so many other photographers that represent these words, but these are, I think, a good place for people to start.
Indeed.
Okay, number 10. I am going to mention 2 people on number 10, but I'm going to focus on 1, and that word is risk. And now the 2 people that I'm going to talk about are actually war correspondents, but risk doesn't mean you have to go to war. Risk is about taking creative risk. Okay, it's about doing what you haven't seen done, or doing what you feel you have to do, regardless of what the noise of the online community is telling you to do. I mean, if I see another oversaturated landscape, I'm going to lose it. It's about originality. The first person is Ron Haviv, and Ron is one of the founders of 7 Agency, which is one of the best photojournalism agencies in the world. Ron has made more than one image that changed the course of our globe, our world, literally. He made images that changed the world, more than one. If you are able to to say that one time in your life, it's pretty astounding. For it to happen more than once is kind of unparalleled. But the person I want to focus on is almost unknown in photography, sadly, and her name is Catherine Leroy. And Catherine Leroy, I was fortunate to meet her towards the end of her life. She lived in Los Angeles, and we had friends of friends. I have my friend Mike Nelson from Wire Service Photographer to thank for introducing me to Catherine. She was tiny. She was like 80 pounds. She was French. She won the Robert Capa Medal for her coverage of the Vietnam War. She was fearless. She was the first correspondent to do a parachute jump with the military. She was so small they had to weigh her down because they thought the parachute would like just take off with her.
Wow.
She was injured in Vietnam outside the DMZ. She recovered in a hospital, went right back in the field. She got captured by the NVA, was the only photographer to get captured and then convince them to allow them to photograph. And she did, and got the cover of Life magazine. She won the Robert Capa Gold Medal for her coverage in Vietnam. She was feisty. And this woman put herself at risk on a daily basis and just kept going back for more. So I met her in Los Angeles, and she told me about covering the war in Lebanon. And she told me stories about Lebanon that just literally gave me chills about how close she came to being killed during the war. That's probably one of her most famous photographs right there. So, here's a woman operating in a male-dominated theater in the middle of war, repeatedly being injured, and she didn't take guff off of anyone. And, this is a commendable person to follow. And again, you don't hear much talk about her, sadly. There were a lot of photographers that covered the war in Vietnam on both sides of the battle, and she's somebody to know. All right, we have come to number 11. We've come to the end of our little talk here. We've got one more person to talk about, and I have 2 of his books to show off.
Amazing.
And
11 photographers, Dan. We've only been into this like 35 minutes. That's pretty incredible.
So he hails from a land that gave us Vegemite. They gave us the Tim Tam, Mick Dundee, and the Road Warrior. And right there alone, that's enough right there.
Shrimp on the Barbie.
They gave us everything. Australia is fantastic. And we're talking about Trent Park. He's the Magnum member, the Australian member of Magnum. And the word that I'm using to associate with him is location. I think so many photographers, and this has happened many, many times, especially with young photographers, they think that they have to travel the world making stories. I got to go here. I got to go here. I've looked at so many portfolios, and it's so painful and agonizing every time I have to do this. A young photographer will walk up and put a portfolio in front of me, and the first thing they'll say is, I've been to 30 countries. I've been to 60 countries. I've been to 50 countries. And you look at their work, and there's not a single original photograph in there. What they're obsessed with is copying what they've seen done in all these other countries.
Ouch.
Trent Park is Australian. I'm guessing he's done projects outside of Australia, but pretty much every single thing I've ever seen him do is in Australia. And years ago, he did a project called Minutes to Midnight, which to me, if this was the only time he ever picked up a camera, if this was the only project he ever did, he would still be on my list because it was so good. And the behind the scenes, if you can do a little research about how he did this project, driving around Australia in a 4x4, processing film in the bush, hanging his film from trees in the bush to let it dry.
That's just unbelievable.
That's how he made these little prints in the field and sent them to Magnum, and that was how he got his intro to Magnum. Wow. This guy is unbelievable. His last exhibition was called The Black Rose. It's hard to even comprehend what this project was. It took him 7 years to complete it. It was artist books that then morphed into a museum show in Adelaide. I had friends who attended the show, and they just walked out shaking their heads. They were like, I've never seen anything quite like it. So it's about location. He's an Australian, and he works in Australia, and he does projects on his hometown. He does projects that are right outside his front door, and he does them as well or better than anyone else in the world. Apparently, and I don't know this for sure, I find it hard to believe, but I have friends who hung out with him before, and they told me this, and I think it's absolutely hysterical if it's true. I've heard that he doesn't have a mobile phone or email, and definitely is not on social. And he could be, for all I know. I've never checked. I never will. But look at that photograph. Look at the light. I mean, that is a guy. I mean, first of all, you get a little bit of luck there with the cloud cover, but
the
that is
richness of that.
timeless,
Well,
beautiful.
sorry to butt in here, but I think we're not showing the images on screen. I just noticed.
No, we got it on there. I just.
Oh, do we now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's fantastic. He's just one of those guys. I think when you run into another Trent Park fan, people just typically shake their heads and go, "Oh yeah, I don't even know what to say." So it's I like his work. He seems like a normal guy as well. And let's face it, sometimes when you get into the higher levels of whether it's art or photography, you can run into people who are maybe not necessarily the people you want to hang out with. There's a lot of ego, there's a lot of insecurity, there's a lot of competition, that kind of thing. But there are plenty of people that you meet and you go, wow, this is like a totally normal guy. I've talked about many of them on this list: the Sarah Terrys, the Dan Winters, the Douglas Kirklands. These are people that you meet and they treat you like you've known them their whole life. And I've never met him, but from what I've heard from people, he's like a board shorts and t-shirt kind of guy. And there's no pretense. He just goes out and makes badass photo projects. And that's the name of the game.
And these are all film, yeah, obviously.
Yeah, he's a film photographer. I'm guessing he's shot some stuff with digital. Again, I've never spoken to him about it, but he's 99 point. From what I've seen of his work, it's either large format or medium format color, and a lot of it is 35 black and white.
Yeah.
And there's a few short docs on YouTube about him. There's one where he's driving around the country with his wife, who's also a really good photographer. And they're photographing in a little town somewhere, like a goat race where they have kids in wagons being pulled by goats, I think it is. It's pretty funny. But yeah, he shoots a lot of 35 black and white. And, it's just proof you don't need anything fancy. Oh, by the way, he's done multiple books with Steidl, which is Gerhard Steidl is considered by many to be the best photo book publisher in the world. And so Trent's done several books with him, which is, to get a book with Steidl is a huge deal. There's also a documentary film about, I think it's titled Doing a Book with Steidl, that tells you about how crazy that process is. He's got a vision and he just goes out and fulfills it.
Well, Dan, this is a pretty amazing course of photography. And hey, you guys, we've got Dan for a few more minutes. So if you've got a question, now is your chance. And you just collected these over the years and put it together as, I love the idea of associating it with the word. Jared, we got to make sure when we put the links up, we also include his word that goes along with it, because that is a brilliant way to kind of organize these in your own mind. Make it simple.
Yeah, this whole list came about in about 10 minutes between blurb phone calls last week, where I was like, I need to do something that takes my mind off of being on another phone call. And I was like, And it was, again, the politicians that triggered me, because I looked around and I'm like, of all these words that we just went over, most of our politicians don't exemplify any of these. And I was like, okay, that's a problem. And then who would exemplify some of these words? And then my brain went to photographers and I thought, oh, this will be kind of fun. And I looked at my bookshelf really quickly and I thought, okay, there's got to be. And then I just started closing my eyes and thinking about my experiences in the past in the field of running into a lot of these people. And I was like, oh, and some of these people I've hung out with many, many times. Been to their houses, hung out, been to their studios, etc. So it's been really fun to get to know them. And, it's interesting because being around these folks, it gives you a glimpse into a level of the industry that's not common for people to see. Because, again, they're working all the time. So it's hard, there's people within 5 miles of where I'm sitting right now that could be on this list that are, Kurt Marcus lives 5 miles from here. And, his work, he's unbelievable. It's his archive. It makes me dizzy when I see it, because it's.
Let's pull him up just as a curious. Jared, can you bring him up?
Kurt Marcus is another guy who's just prolific: editorial, commercial, advertising, fashion. And he was a Montana guy for a long time. It's K-U-R-T Marcus. There you go. No, that's not him. That's somebody else. He's primarily a black and white photographer. During the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, he was as hot as anybody in photography. It's K-U-R-T Marcus.
And yes, Rachel, thanks for just joining us. And anybody else who's joining us, this is Dan Milnor. He's going over 11, now 12 photographers. And we will also have all the links to these guys published in the show notes coming up. Of course, you can watch this video.
It's Kurt Marcus, holy cow. I mean,
There he
again,
is.
he's a bit like Dan Winters in the sense that he's impossible to pigeonhole because, for me, I was kind of a one-trick pony thing. There's one kind of photography that I really like to do. These guys can do anything, and it's, you go in his dark room and you're like, okay, I should just probably leave. I'm not really worthy of being in here. And so, for me to go through and look at a website like Kurt Marcus or any of these other people is just a reminder of like, okay, so if you have amoebas and protozoa down here at the bottom of the evolution scale, you have me right above that. And then the actual photography scale starts up here, and then these people are at the top. So I might be just above like mollusk. That's where I would be. And they're actually on the scale and at the top.
Some of us, this is reminding me of what happened when Jimi Hendrix went to England and debuted, and all these great photographers, Jeff Beck and you name it, George Harrison, they were shut down. They couldn't play music after that because they were so in awe of what Jimmy could do with the guitar. And that's kind of what you're doing here. Hopefully we will use this as a springboard, but to watch these photographers and the kind of range of work that you're showing is pretty amazing. And it's quite a shot in the arm in terms of what we need to be doing and how much work we need to be getting out there.
Yeah, I mean, Mick and Keith Richards went to see Hendrix in London, and then after the show, Mick said that Keith looked at him, or vice versa, and said, "Now what are we going to do?"
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Hendrix had just like blown their head off, and so, yeah, I mean, if you look at the range of what's on this website, you have to realize that this is thousands of assignments going back decades of someone whose entire life was dedicated to this craft. This is not a looky-loo. This is not someone who's fixated on equipment or technology. None of that. These are people that are operating, I don't even know how to describe it. These are, to me, the legitimate professionals in the field of photography. These are the people that we have to figure out a way to ensure their survival in the industry, because the photography industry is turned, when the technology arrived, and especially now with the things like the economic collapse, the virus, et cetera, we have got to ensure that people like this have a way of surviving as photographers and also thriving as photographers, because they have a responsibility to our culture and society to continue to produce work like this, because nobody else is doing it. And the thing is, when you take an archive 100 years from now, the Kurt Marcus archive, the Sarah Terry archive, the Catherine Leroy archive, the Dan Winters, the Douglas Kirkland, they will survive. All this social media garbage is not going to survive. All the YouTube stuff, and I'm guilty of it as well, my stuff's not going to survive. These people are the ones who are the recorders of our time. I think I just invented a word, recordian.
Recording.
I'm taking it.
Go for it. We'll put it in the
I just
Oxford.
copyrighted that. I don't even think of using it. I just copyrighted it.
The recordians.
So, yeah, it's really important culturally for us to figure out a way for these people to continue to do what they're doing, because, again, they're not being replaced. Most of the people on this list are my age or older, and that should be a testament. Now, it's not to say that there aren't good young photographers. There's plenty. But sadly, the industry does not exist in the same way that it did for the people on this list. When these people got started, the industry was a totally different place.
Totally different.
Photographers were looked at very differently. The sharing of information was very different, was slower and more methodical and more thought out, more limited. And so it was a totally different thing. And it's unfair to take a young, 20-year-old hotshot and say, well, gee, you haven't become Salgado yet, because there's no industry to support the 20-year-old hotshot. They've got to create their own weather system and figure out a way to survive. And
it's true.
We have to get creative. We have to put the screws to people that are blowing money on nonsense. Brands are famous, like camera brands now are famous for supporting people that should not be sponsored. Let's just be honest. You might have 10,000 Instagram followers, and a brand looks at you and says, gee, we're going to sponsor you, but your work sucks. Why aren't these camera companies sponsoring people like this? Because they're the ones that are making the work that's going to survive. That's my opinion. And I know, again, a little tough love there. So,
yeah. Well, listen, I've got a question. Dan, I got my own question for you. How have you used these guys? 'Cause we're going to mention this again, but we're doing a big survey right now. In fact, I want you guys to make sure at the end of this you fill out the survey if you haven't already done that. But one of the things that's already come up as a concern is getting inspired. Now, how have you used these photographers in your own work? How has it inspired you? What's the process for you?
Well, I find inspiration a very tricky word right now because I've had a lot of younger photographers approach me over the past 5 years and talk about, not having inspiration. And I find that absolutely astounding. And I don't mean to take shots at them. I get it. Coming from their age and their perspective, it makes a little bit of sense to me. I have never lacked inspiration in my life about anything because I read every day. I read almost, somewhere between 80 and 100 books a year. That to me is a great inspiration. But in terms of these particular people, to me, they're a gauntlet. They are a reminder when I look in the mirror of how little I have been able to accomplish. And I don't look at that and see, and this is where the big difference is. I'm 51, I'm not 21. If I was 21, I might look at some of these people and feel discouraged and say, well, the industry's not going to do that. And I don't have this and I don't have that and blah, blah, blah. And, fall back on going on to Instagram. I get it. That's easy to do. That's the slippery slope. That's what that's what the tech giants want us to do. But what I do is I look at these people and I go, I haven't done anything. I need to get off my ass and go do something good. And I need to take the time to figure out what that is. I'm not going to look at what I'm looking at here at Kurt Marcus and go to Monument Valley and figure out where he put his tripod and then copy that and put it on Instagram. That's not photography. What I would do is I look at Kurt Marcus and I look at the range and I look at the archive and I look at the philosophy behind what he's doing and the technique and how he sees light. And I might be able to say, you know what, there's a consistency to a certain style of image that he makes that resonates with me. So how is he making it? Not technically how is he making it, but how is he seeing the light or how is he creating the light? And then I can sort of try to adapt that into my work. And so they're motivational to me, and again, I go to Kirkland's. If I hang out with Douglas Kirkland or Sarah Terry or Ron Aviv or whoever, I'm the lesser creature in the conversation when it comes to photography. And so I look at that as, hey, these people can teach me a lot about what to do, not just in photography, but in my life. How do I behave? How do I be a professional? What does it mean to be professional? How do I be consistent? How does Kurt Marcus shoot for 40 years at the top of his game? I don't know. So I study and try to figure out how he did it. I mean, I don't work as a photographer anymore, so I don't necessarily have that need or goal right now. But if I was, these are the people I'd be studying. I wouldn't be on Instagram looking at people. No way, because it all looks the same. I wouldn't even look at these people on Instagram because I'm not interested in knowing them that way. I'm not interested in this.
Yeah.
This to me this is not a career.
Right.
This is killing time at an airport at best.
That's fast food.
And so it is. It's empty calories.
Yeah. Dan, a couple of questions about what you read. Fiction, nonfiction. Does that include photographic books? Or I kind of know the answer, but what is the answer?
I read everything. I read a ton of fiction, a ton of nonfiction. I just finished a book called World Without Mind, which is about the perils of the tech industry and sort of what they've done to us and what their goals were when they, Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, the big four. I also am starting a book called The Asia Cauldron, which is about the South China Sea and how over the next 50 years, the South China Sea could be the sort of battleground for modern culture, and how basically, the wars of the past were land wars with ground troops. And now we're looking at a region where the next sort of geopolitical strategies and potential wars are going to unfold on the surface of the ocean. And it's fascinating. It walks back through the history of the Cham people in Vietnam and Cambodia, and then runs up to modern China and all the countries that are, have territorial claims to the South China Sea. And then,
it's interesting, Dan. I'm butting in here, but
go ahead.
I've been going through a series of books that I read many years ago, just rereading them. I'm at the very end of On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I read that, when I was 18, and it's interesting to revisit some of these classics. A lot of John Steinbeck I reread. You get a different take.
I have a certain set of books that I reread every year. I reread Rum Diary by Hunter Thompson. I reread Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. It goes on and on. I love Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.H. Lawrence. I love T.E. Lawrence. I love, I have a ton. There are actually many of them. What am I thinking? The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham.
Razor's Edge. That's a
books.
classic. That's a real
I'm actually
classic.
getting ready to read a children's book, believe it or not. And this was written by Marc Romanelli, who's a photographer here in Santa Fe, who I met in a pool in Albuquerque about 2 years ago. And a couple of weeks ago, I was riding my bike out in this little tiny town, and it was sunrise. And I'm way outside of Santa Fe, and I see this guy walking with a German Shepherd. And the German Shepherd is not on a leash, and I'm on a bicycle. And I just got bitten by a German Shepherd last year. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to keep my distance. But I see him, and from a distance, I'm like, I think I know that guy. And I yelled out to him, I go, are you a photographer? And he goes, I am. And I said, I think I met you in a pool in Albuquerque. And he goes, oh, yeah. And so we reconnected. And he just did this children's book called The Imagination Warriors. And it's I've not started to read it yet, but there's illustrations in it, too, by this woman named Odessa Sawyer, who lives here in Santa Fe. And her illustrations are really good. And so I've got a children's book on my horizon.
Awesome. And yes, Movable Feast is another one you got to read a lot. Hemingway.
Yep.
I read Old Man and the Sea just recently. We read that in grade school, right?
Yep. Sun Also Rises. I mean,
Sun
I think
Also
Catcher in the Rye.
Catcher in the Rye.
Another
Travels
good one.
with Charlie was just mentioned here. Curious Lizard has been driving around the country reading Travels with Charlie. That was such a great book. I need to reread it. But yes, reading inspires, right? You don't have to just look at visual stuff.
And if you like Travels with Charlie, then you have to read Blue Highways by William Yeast Heatmoon. That is unbelievable. That's another right up in that category called Blue Highways. That's a famous travel book about the United States. And his name is incredible, William Heat Least Moon, something like that. Wow. I'm probably getting that a little bit wrong, but that's another great book. Someone wrote World War III is definitely going to happen. Yeah, it's looking more and more likely if we don't come to our senses. The crazy thing is, I bet you if we took everybody on this call and we physically put us in a room, I can almost guarantee you there may be some disagreements here and there, right? We're going to have different views on things, but I think we would all work it out, right? We'd sit together and we'd be like, all right, you like red better, I like green, but I don't hate you because you like red. But man, do we make bad decisions when it comes to our strategic leadership. And I'm not just talking about America. I'm talking, there's plenty of samples around the world. I think the people in the world are genuinely good. And we've got to exercise our power when we can. But World War III, I think we should get your film ready, get your cameras ready.
Well, let's fix that problem before we get to it. But listen, that's another subject, another show, another day. Hey, Dan, I know what your schedule's like. Thanks for taking time out to put this together, to educate us once again. There's so much meat on the bone here. You guys can keep chewing this for a long, long time and do your homework. So, Dan?
Yeah.
Thanks again. We'll see you,
of course,
probably in a couple of weeks once again.
Yeah, probably so. I wish everybody well out there, and I hope this list was helpful. I can envision 6 months from now coming back with another list.
I love it. And introduce me to any of those guys that you still know. I'd love to bring them on the show. Seriously.
Well, if I had $50 in my pocket, maybe I would make some introductions.
Maybe that $50. Jared, send him over a $50 bill. Okay.
All right, peeps.
All right, you guys. And Dan, thank you. Hang on, you guys. Don't go away. I got a couple of things to talk to you about. Thanks for joining us. That is your photography education right there in one show. We're going to definitely put this up with the show notes and the links and all the added fiction books. And there's a lot of stuff here. This is a year's worth of education in one show. So a couple of things I got to tell you about. One is make sure, yes, another wicked good show. I agree. Jared, put the link up to the survey. If you guys haven't taken it yet, please take a few minutes. It's a short survey, but we really want to know some things that are going to help us help you. We're going to help me help you. Okay. So, Jared, there's the link, and please make sure you take it. We are not going to do any other live shows until next Friday. We have a very special guest, Dotan Sagai. He's a black and white photographer in Los Angeles. He's going to show us, he's a really great photographer, but he's also going to show us his workflow, how he goes from color to black and white. It's not just one slider, guys. There's much more to it. It's like developing in the darkroom. Please mark that down on your calendar next Friday at 10 a.m. And on that same note, will you guys check in? Because I've had people ask me, how do we know what's coming up? Well, we have a calendar. We have an event page. Jared, put that up there too. And put this under your pillow every night. I want you to look at it before you go to sleep every day and when you wake up every day, so you don't forget any of what's coming up. Because it will tell you every video that we're publishing, every live broadcast. This is what you need to be tuned into, okay? The events page, and Jared's going to put it up there. So make sure you guys are here next Friday. Between now and then, there's other stuff going on. I just got back from a road trip. It was fantastic. Shot a lot of video, shot a lot of photos. I'm going to put that together. Depending how fast I can do it, maybe it'll be up by Sunday, maybe next week, for sure next week. I'm going to show you some things that some of our guests have talked about. Like Dan talked about putting your idea, get an idea if you're going to go on a road trip, like what it is you want to capture, make it into a story. I'm also going to show you what our friend Bob Holmes is talking about, or has talked about, which is there's no such thing as bad light. There's only inappropriate light. Hey, listen, I was shooting midday and I found a lot of interesting images. You got to avoid the harsh shadows, but sometimes the shadows work for you. And I'll show you in that video coming up. Okay, so there's your homework. Stay tuned for next Friday, 10 a.m. I want you guys on there. It's going to be an awesome show. I want you guys to check out our event page. I want you to fill out the survey, okay? Help me help you once again. And be sure you subscribe. Tell your friends and share these videos with them. Leave your comments, like them. And last but not least, I don't think I've forgotten anything. Remember, that's right, say this with me. Remember to get out and capture your own images of life. Love you guys. Stay safe, stay well, stay tuned to AYP. Watch another video right now, okay? And stay on AYP. We got a lot of great content here. You probably haven't seen it all. Even if you have, see it again. And I'll see you guys soon. Love you.